It seems as if the current administration thinks that our nation can avoid a recession permanently as long as we just continue to change the definition of what a recession is. Now, in light of the fact that over the last few days, there's been a lot of media attention on the fact that the Biden administration has changed the way it defines recession, including in this recent post from the White House, we have seen fact checkers come out of the woods in order to verify whether or not the White House actually is trying to change the definition of a recession. So in this video, we are going to fact check the fact checkers about the word recession, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and the actual state of the economy. Ready? Let's dive in. Real quick, a word from today's sponsor, Swan Bitcoin. I use Swan Bitcoin to buy Bitcoin every single day. I dollar cost average, I stack sats. That means that as the price of Bitcoin is volatile and moving downwards, I'm getting my total overall position at a lower cost. I'm averaging down into it. The reason I use Swan Bitcoin is because we're looking around today, we're watching crypto exchanges lay people off. They're falling over like flies because they've all been not conservative. They've taken out leverage, but not so with Swan Bitcoin. They're extremely conservative, so I know that it's safe to use them. Because they only focus on Bitcoin, they're very efficient, very cheap, and the best part is they're extremely safe because your Bitcoin doesn't stay with them. You auto withdraw to a wallet of your choice whenever you want, and that's why I use Swan Bitcoin. And if you use my link in the description below, you will get $15 worth of Bitcoin just for signing up. During the first quarter of this year, January through March, the total GDP contracted. Instead of our GDP growing, it declined. Now, as a result of this, after that, myself and many other people started saying, hey, we are already in a recession because a recession is 2 quarters in a row of GDP going down instead of going up. And so everybody said, hey, we're probably going to see second quarter have those same numbers as well. Well, it turns out that in June of this year, the Atlanta Fed came out with their new estimation and said, hey, we probably also saw a decline in GDP for the second quarter. There's a problem though. The total data wasn't already out yet, so it's still just a guess. But now, as we are approaching the day, the 28th of July, when the official numbers for GDP for the second quarter of this year will be released, we're starting to see the White House try and front run that and say, hey, even if we have a decline in GDP, the current state of the economy is not actually that bad. And when we look at this recent blog post from the White House, we see the first couple of paragraphs trying to define what a recession is. It says some people maintain that 2 consecutive quarters of falling real GDP constitute a recession. However, that's neither the official definition nor the way economists evaluate the state of the business cycle. Now, we have to pause for a second here because there really is no technical official definition of what a recession is. That is true. So the fact that they're trotting this out there right now is very clearly just an attempt to try and gaslight, as Peter Schiff pointed out at schiffgold.com, that they're taking gaslighting to a new level. They're basically trying to say, hey, look, things have gotten really hard for you financially, right? Wrong. They haven't gotten hard for you financially. We're not in a recession. In fact, things are actually great. And the fact of the matter is that just because we have a decline in real GDP for 2 quarters in a row means nothing. We're not actually in a recession. Your eyes are lying to you. Now, this gets into an argument of really semantics here, which I think is the least intelligent and least effective form of argumentation here. It's saying, hey, well, there's really no real definition for a recession, so we're not in a recession. That's like saying, hey, there's really no definition for being sick, so just because you're throwing up and you have a fever doesn't mean you're actually sick. You could be just throwing up and having a fever from something else. It's like, no, you don't have E. coli. I mean, technically everybody has E. coli, right? There's E. coli in everybody's stomach, so it doesn't mean you got sick from that restaurant or had food poisoning or anything like that. Again, it's just semantics. There's no technical or real definition for anything. There's just a general consensus on what specific words mean, and we go about our daily lives agreeing that different words mean different things, generally speaking. Obviously, there's a gray area for everything. That doesn't matter. But when we start to see redefinitions happening over time, what we really need to do is take a step back and come to an agreement on what the words mean that we're using so we can talk intelligently about it. So this is one of the reasons why I don't like the whole argument about inflation. A lot of people say, hey, inflation isn't prices going up. Inflation is the money supply going up, and the result of that is prices going up. It's like 100 years ago, you're right, but that's not how people use the word anymore. It doesn't matter. That's semantics. It's not effective for anything. A lot of people also make the argument, oh, fiat currency is currency. It's not money. If it's money, it's got to be gold or silver or something else. Insert your money of choice. It's like, maybe at some point that was true, but I don't actually think that ever was true. Really, we're just arguing about semantics here, and most people, when they say money, they're talking about dollars. They're talking about the fiat currency that they use. So it's useless to have an argument about trying to redefine those words to something that either they never were or they were 100 years ago. It's more effective to use modern parlance, agree on the word, agree on what we're talking about, and move forward effectively from there. So what does this have to do with the recession? Well, they're arguing semantics again. It's useless. What are most people concerned about when we are talking about a recession? Most people are concerned about financial pain. Am I gonna lose my job? Are things gonna get more expensive? Am I gonna have less income? Am I gonna be able to afford my basic needs? And am I gonna be out on the streets? Am I gonna go hungry? Am I gonna be able to provide for those who rely on me to be responsible to provide for them? Those are the things people care about. They don't care about a technical recession, a decline in 2 quarters of GDP, general business activity going up, unemployment levels of other people out there. What people really care about is my personal financial pain or success. That's it. And when you measure through those lenses, we are in a very deep recession right now. But it is possible that they will be able to continue saying we are not in a real recession no matter what happens with GDP numbers, and here's why. When you take a look at what Janet Yellen said, she said on public television that 2 straight quarters of negative GDP is neither the official definition nor the way economists evaluate the state of the business cycle. She also stated that she would be amazed if the National Bureau of Economic Research, which determines whether we're officially in a recession, were to declare that. Guess what? I agree with her there. I would be shocked if the National Bureau of Economic Research right now came out and said, oh yeah, we're in a recession. Why is that? Well, let's take a look at a couple of charts. First, we're going to take a look at this beautiful chart from the Federal Reserve. This is their balance sheet. This shows the amount of money that they've printed since 2003. We can look here and we see a giant fat gray bar running through the center of the chart here, and then a little tiny gray bar running through the chart over here in 2020. What are these gray bars, you might ask? Oh, it says shaded areas indicate U.S. recessions. So there must be some definition of a recession. Otherwise, how do you put a gray bar where a recession happens? Well, let's take a look. When we click on that link, it takes us to this page that says what dates are used for the recession bars. The Federal Reserve Economic Data Database, it uses business cycle turning points determined by who? The National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER. You can find the data here. So what do we get when we click on that link? Explanation of U.S. business cycle expansions and contractions. Digging down a little bit further, we can find that it is defined as a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy that lasts more than a few months. Crystal clear. And this is why general consensus matters, because most people have been using the general consensus of 2 consecutive quarters of a decline in GDP as what a recession is. Does that mean everybody's going to have economic pain? No. Does that mean that everything is going to collapse? No. Does that mean that you can't have economic pain, financial pain, without it being in a recession? Absolutely not. But it does mean that we can have some educated conversations about it. But when the lines are so blurry to the point where you say, okay, a significant decline in economic activity that lasts more than a few months, you open yourselves up to being able to say, hey, recession is whenever we say it is. And Yellen went as far as saying we are not in a recession right now, even if we have a decline in GDP for the second quarter and experience these 2 quarters, because we are creating almost 400,000 jobs a month right now. That is not a recession. Pause. Side note, she said when you are creating almost 400,000 jobs a month, that's not a recession. Question for Janet Yellen here. Who's creating those jobs? Is it the federal government providing and creating goods and services that people are voluntarily buying by choice and creating jobs to create those goods and services? No, it's not the federal government. Who is it then? Private businesses? Individuals creating goods and services that private citizens are choosing to buy of their own accord voluntarily? So it's not the administration. It's not the government. It is individuals, it is private companies that are creating those jobs. The only thing, and I repeat, the only thing that a government does to an economy is hinder it. That is the role of the government to a free market, is to hinder it. Now, a good government would hinder the bad things from happening: fraud, deceit, theft, violence. So there are some things that many people would make the case for that say, hey, the government should be there to hinder those activities. The government doesn't create value, it takes it. Okay. Back to the recession. Yellen says when you're creating almost 400,000 jobs a month, that's not a recession. And she's pointing out the fact here that when you look at the GDP numbers contracting, that's not the only number. We also have to take a look at general business activity and strength in the economy, and jobs are a big part of that. So what happens when jobs start going away? And thank you so much, Malad, for sending this chart to me on Twitter, layoffs.fyi. This is a layoffs tracker of startups. We can see that if you go to layoff charts since March of 2020, we can see the beginning of this year, we started having massive numbers of layoffs that rival what was happening in 2020. Now, are these all companies? No, these are startups. These are the most vulnerable. This is a leading economic indicator. You're going to see other companies follow suit. This is why employment is such a lagging measure, and that's why they're trying to point at employment right now. Like she said, 400,000 jobs a month. They're trying to point at that to say, oh no, don't pay attention to all the economic pain you're feeling. We're doing great. Look at all these jobs, because they know that's something that happened a while ago that still looks good. It's not going to look good in the future though. And now we get to the final point of this video, how you can delay a recession forever just by changing the definition there, just by changing what you're looking at, because right now we're looking at jobs. But what happens when you take jobs away? Then you want to continue to say we don't have a recession. All you have to do is go back to the GDP numbers. And you have to ask yourself, well, how is GDP number calculated? Well, the GDP of a nation is an estimate of the total value of the goods and services it produced during a specific period. It's calculated by adding up all the money spent by consumers, businesses, and the government in a given period. So food for thought here. Let's say we have zero change in the amount of stuff in an economy, zero change in the amount of jobs in an economy, zero change in the amount of services in an economy. We just, for a time period, have an evenly rotating economy. But let's say during that time, let's say 1 quarter, we create twice as much money that exists as compared to before. So if you've got $100 in your bank account, congratulations, you've now got $200 in your bank account. And we evenly distribute it everywhere so that everybody gets that doubling effect of their money. Would there be any change to anything on a real basis? No. Absolutely not. Because you would go to buy your $5 cheeseburger and you'd realize it now costs $10. You would go to work for what you thought you were getting paid $15 an hour for. Now you're getting paid $30 an hour for it. You'd go to pay your rent for $2,000. Now you've got to pay $4,000. You've got twice as much money coming in and in your bank account, twice as much money going out. In real terms, nothing changes, right? But GDP, would that change? Technically, it would. You would see a surge in GDP because it's a calculation of the total amount of money that's spent in an economy. So all you have to do to make GDP numbers go up is print a bunch of money. That money enters the economy, it gets spent, and it makes the economy look bigger. But did anything real change? No. Now, obviously, I know that GDP numbers are revised for inflation. So real GDP is adjusted for prices going up. However, the way that inflation is measured, everybody knows, is muted, number one. Number two, we know that money doesn't hit an economy perfectly distributed everywhere. And so that money hits certain places first and certain people first. So you start to see the business activity accelerate first while that spending ramps up before prices adjust. And so that's why we see a spike in GDP when money is printed. So where am I going with this? We get back to that recession, trying to delay that forever. The White House administration trying to say, hey, we're not in a recession because GDP contracted, but jobs are going up. What happens when jobs go down? All we got to do is lift that GDP number back up. We can do that simply by printing money, forcing those numbers up, even though there's still real economic pain happening. And so it doesn't matter what the GDP numbers say. To be honest, the White House is right about that. We are experiencing economic pain, though. They're wrong about that. And the more you try and gaslight your citizens, and the more you try and tell people that what they are living through is incorrect, and what they see is not really there, and what they experience is not really happening, the closer you get to that dangerous line where the people look at you and say, I don't want you in power anymore. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.